He didn't look at her when he spoke. That was the first thing people noticed. Not the words. The words came later, and they were bad enough. But the way Raymond Aldridge kept his eyes fixed on the menu while Cecile Mouton stood there with her notepad, waiting. Like she had all the time in the world, and none of it mattered. She was used to that. 22 years on the floor of Hargrove and Stone. The kind of restaurant where the bread costs more than most people's lunches, and the wine list is bound in leather. Cecile had seen everything. She had seen men who looked right through her. She had seen women who spoke to her slowly. The way you speak to someone you're not sure understands English. She had seen all of it, and she had learned. The way her grandmother Odette had taught her. Quiet and firm in that little kitchen in Bros Bridge, Louisiana. That you keep your hands steady and your face open, and you let them think whatever they need to think. That is the thing about dignity. You can't take it from someone who knows where they left it. Raymond Aldridge was a name that moved money. Not old money. He was too loud for that, too deliberate about the watch on his wrist, and the car that his assistant called ahead, to make sure the valet knew was coming. He ran a private equity firm out of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, and the kind of men who ran things like that had learned somewhere along the way that the world bent for them if they leaned hard enough. He had 3 guests with him that evening, 2 men in suits that matched his energy exactly, and a woman named Lorraine who laughed a half-second after he did at everything he said. They were celebrating something. Cecile didn't know what, and didn't need to. She had been assigned their table because she was the senior server on the floor that night. That was how it worked at Hargrove and Stone. The difficult tables went to the people who could handle them. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome to Hargrove and Stone. My name is Cecile, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Raymond Aldridge looked up then, just briefly. Just long enough to look at her and then look away. The way you glance at something you've already decided isn't relevant. "Water," he said. "Still. And whoever handles the wine list." "I handle the wine list, sir," Cecile said. He looked at her again, longer this time. "Fine," he said, and went back to the menu. She brought the water. She brought the bread. She answered questions about the halibut and the preparation of the rack of lamb. And she did it with the same steady warmth she brought to every table, because that was the job, and she was good at it. Raymond Aldridge ignored most of what she said, and spoke over the end of her sentences, which told her everything she needed to know about who he was when nobody was grading him. Then the other guests arrived. Cecile was refilling the water glasses when she heard the door and looked up to see a man she recognized. Hiroshi Tanaka, the head of Tanaka Capital, one of the most respected private investment firms in Japan. She recognized him because 3 months earlier, she had served him at a private dinner upstairs, and he had been gracious and specific in his compliments about the food. And he had left a note with the manager afterward saying the service was exceptional. She remembered people like that. He came in with 2 colleagues and a woman who turned out to be his daughter, a young woman named Yuki who was studying architecture at Columbia. They were joining Raymond Aldridge's table. This was, Cecile understood from the energy in the room, the real reason for the celebration. There was a deal on the table somewhere, or close enough to one that everyone was dressed for it. Hiroshi Tanaka greeted the table warmly. His English was excellent, accented, and precise. They shook hands. Lorraine laughed at something. The 2 suited men leaned forward with the attentiveness of people who needed this to go well. Cecile moved quietly, the way you learn to, on a floor like this, refilling and adjusting, and staying out of the current of conversation. She was at the sideboard arranging menus when she heard Raymond Aldridge shift, lean toward one of his colleagues, and say something in Japanese. She didn't react. She kept her hands moving. He said it low with the confidence of a man who is certain he is speaking in a room full of people who don't understand him. He was talking about Cecile. He used a word she would not repeat to anyone, and he said it the way people say things they've wanted to say for a while. One of the suited men laughed. A short sound, quickly swallowed. Hiroshi Tanaka's face did something complicated. His daughter Yuki went very still. Cecile set down the menus. She turned around. She walked back to the table, and she looked at Raymond Aldridge directly, and she said, in Japanese, clean and unhurried. The Japanese of someone who had been reading and speaking and listening to it for 15 years. I understood what you said, Mr. Aldridge. All of it. The table went silent. Not the polite silence of a pause in conversation. The real kind. The kind where you can hear the kitchen behind the wall. Raymond Aldridge's face went through several things very fast. Surprise first. Then something that looked like recalculation. The way a man recalibrates when the room has turned and he needs to figure out which way is still safe. Then something harder. Because men like that don't like losing the map. Hiroshi Tanaka set down his water glass. He looked at Cecile, and his expression had changed entirely. There was something in it that she would think about later. A kind of recognition, the way you look at someone when you realize you'd been looking at them wrong. You speak Japanese, he said. Not a question. Yes, Cecile said. I've been studying for 15 years. I have a particular interest in Heian-era literature. Your country has been generous to me through its books. Yuki, the daughter, made a small sound. It might have been surprise. It might have been something else. Where did you study? Hiroshi asked. Here, Cecile said. The public library on 5th. Textbooks I ordered used. A community class on Saturday mornings at the YMCA for the first 2 years, and after that, on my own. I found some very good correspondence partners online. A retired school teacher in Kyoto, who corrected my grammar for 3 years in exchange for my correcting her English. Her name was Fumiko. She passed away in 2019, and I still think about her most days. Yuki said something to her father in Japanese then. Cecile understood it. She's the real thing, Papa. Hiroshi Tanaka smiled. Raymond Aldridge had not spoken. He was holding his water glass the way you hold something, when you need your hands to be doing something. His 2 suited colleagues were looking at the breadbasket. Lorraine was looking at the ceiling. If you want to know what power looks like when it runs out of road, Cecile Mouton could have shown you that table right then. She excused herself. She went to the kitchen. She stood at the prep station for one moment with her hands flat on the steel surface and her eyes on the middle distance, breathing the way Odette had taught her. Slow. From the belly, the way you breathe when you're in the middle of something and you need to stay in your body. Then she picked up the first course and walked back out. The dinner continued. Cecile did her job. She did it the same way she had been doing it for 22 years. Present, attentive, unhurried. She answered questions. She described the desserts. She made sure every glass was full and every plate arrived right. But the table had changed. Raymond Aldridge was quieter than he had been. His energy, which had filled the room when he arrived, had pulled back somewhere inside him. And the suited men were following his lead the way people always followed his lead, so they were quieter too. Lorraine had stopped laughing. Hiroshi Tanaka, by contrast, had grown warmer as the evening went on. He asked Cecile about high-end literature. Specifically about The Tale of Genji, which Cecile had read twice in English translation and once working through the Japanese, with a dictionary, and more patience than she could explain to anyone who hadn't wanted something that badly. They talked about Lady Murasaki for longer than was probably appropriate in the middle of a service, but Hiroshi seemed to have decided that Cecile was worth talking to. And Cecile had long since learned that when someone genuine wants to have a real conversation, you don't cut it short for the sake of looking professional. Yuki asked her, near the end of the meal, how she had kept going with the Japanese when it got hard. And it did get hard, Cecile said. There were years when she set it down. There were months when she picked it back up and felt like she had lost everything and had to start again from the beginning. But she thought about Fumiko. And she thought about what her grandmother had said to her once, years ago, sitting at the kitchen table in Bro Bridge, watching Cecile struggle with a textbook. Baby, the things that are worth having don't care how long they take. Yuki wrote that down on her phone. When the check came, Raymond Aldridge paid it quickly, and without looking at the total. He stood before anyone else at the table had finished gathering their coats. He thanked Hiroshi with the efficient warmth of a man who needed the handshake to say what he couldn't, and then he walked toward the door. He stopped at the sideboard. Cecile was there, collecting menus. He stood for a moment. She didn't fill the silence. I wasn't aware, he said finally, that you spoke the language. Cecile looked at him steadily. I know, she said. He left. Hiroshi Tanaka was the last one from the table to come past her, because he had lingered to say something to the sommelier about a particular burgundy they'd had. When he reached Cecile, he stopped. May I ask you something, he said. Of course. Did you consider not saying anything when you heard him? Cecile was quiet for a moment. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. For about half a second, she said, and then I thought about my grandmother. Hiroshi Tanaka nodded slowly, like that was the answer he'd expected. She sounds like a remarkable woman, he said. She was the most remarkable person I've ever known, Cecile said. She cleaned houses for 30 years in Iberville Parish, and she could speak French, English, and enough Spanish to get by, and she read everything she could get her hands on, and she never once let anybody make her feel small. She used to say that nobody can look down on you without your help. He was quiet for a moment. Would you be willing, he said, to have a conversation with my daughter? Not tonight, she has an early class, but perhaps this week. She is working on her thesis, and she has been struggling, I think, with a question about perseverance that I don't know how to answer for her. He paused. You might, Cecile smiled. Tell her to come by anytime. 3 weeks later, she got a call from the manager of Hargrove and Stone, a man named Douglas Pruitt, who had always been fair with her, and sometimes forgot to be. He told her that Hiroshi Tanaka had called the restaurant personally to request that Cecile be assigned to a private dinner he was hosting the following month. A dinner for 12, in the private room upstairs, where the wine was different, and the tip was different, and the whole tenor of the evening was different. And then he told her something else. Raymond Aldridge's firm and Tanaka Capital had not, in the end, reached a deal. There were various explanations circulating, as there always were in those circles. But Pruitt had heard from someone who'd heard from someone that Hiroshi Tanaka had told a colleague, in Japanese, that he was not interested in doing business with a man who spoke the way Aldridge spoke when he thought no one was listening. That the kind of character a man shows in small moments is the kind of character he brings to everything. Cecile listened to all of this. She thanked Douglas Pruitt. She went back to the floor. There was a family at table 9, a mother, a grandmother, a teenage girl, who was looking at everything in the room with that particular expression that teenagers have when they are trying to look like they're not impressed, but they are. They were dressed carefully, the way people dress when they've saved up for a night out somewhere nice. The mother's hands, Cecile noticed, were the hands of someone who worked hard with them. Cecile took her time with table 9. She described the menu with care. She pointed out which items the kitchen could adjust for the grandmother, who seemed to have a small concern about salt. She told the teenager about the mocktail that nobody ordered because it wasn't on the menu, but that the bar would make if you asked for it. And that tasted like a summer evening in the best way possible. The girl's eyes went wide in that involuntary way. Near the end of the meal, while the grandmother was using the restroom and the mother was helping her navigate the narrow corridor, Cecile stopped at the table and said to the girl, quietly, "What are you interested in?" The girl looked up. 16, maybe 17. What? What are you interested in? What do you think about when you have free time? The girl was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who is not used to adults asking them things they actually mean. Languages, she said finally, like she was admitting something. I've been learning Mandarin on my phone. My mom thinks it's a waste of time. Cecile looked at her. 15 years ago, she had been at a table in the public library on Fifth Avenue with a Japanese textbook and a highlighter, and absolutely nobody in the world who thought it would amount to anything. It's not a waste of time, Cecile said. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She kept several blank ones there, out of habit, and she wrote down 3 things. The name of a community language program that ran Saturday mornings and cost almost nothing. The title of a Mandarin learning resource that a correspondence partner had recommended years ago. And the name of a librarian at the branch on Amsterdam, who had helped Cecile more times than she could count and would help this girl too, if she asked. She folded the paper and set it beside the girl's water glass. "The thing's worth having," Cecile said. "Don't care how long they take." The girl picked up the paper. She read it. She looked up. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it the way young people mean things when they're not performing it for anyone. The mother came back. The grandmother came back. The check was paid, and the coats were gathered, and the family moved toward the door. The girl glancing back once over her shoulder at Cecile with an expression that was hard to name. Somewhere between gratitude and something that looked like a door opening. There is a photograph on Cecile Mouton's refrigerator at home in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. It is a photograph of her grandmother Odette, taken sometime in the 1970s, standing in front of a house in Bro Bridge with her arms crossed and her chin up, and the expression of a woman who has made her own peace with the world and is not taking offers. Cecile looks at it most mornings when she gets her coffee. She used to think that what her grandmother had given her was patience. But that's not quite right. Patience is what you practice when you're waiting for something. What Odette gave her was something quieter and more durable than that. It was the knowledge that who you are doesn't live in how other people see you. It lives in what you know, and what you've built, and what you choose to do. In the moment when someone like Raymond Aldridge goes over and says what he says, and thinks no one in the room can hear him. It lives in the way you put down the menus, and turn around and open your mouth and speak.